Before the treachery of Horus ever came into being, the 20th Legion existed behind a veil so thick that even other servants of the Imperium rarely glimpsed it. Its formation, its purpose, and even the nature of its early deployments remained concealed within the highest circles of Imperial authority, and the pattern of that concealment makes it difficult to doubt that such secrecy had been permitted by the will of the Emperor himself. Many Imperial scholars have long believed that this careful obscurity surrounding the Legion served another purpose, one that only became clear with time. Beneath the silence and hidden operations there grew a darker transformation, a slow change in character that unfolded over many years and deepened after Horus rose to the rank of War Master. As this change matured, the Legion became ever more drawn to methods of deception, subterfuge, and sudden destruction, until it resembled the ancient serpentine monster whose many heads could never truly be cut away. In time, that image would become both symbol and method, the Hydra whose coiling forms moved through shadow and uncertainty. The Legion that carried that symbol proved to be a weapon that neither the Emperor nor the War Master could entirely command. The mystery that surrounded the Legion can be traced all the way back to its creation. When the gene seed strains for the Legiones Astartes were first developed at the end of the Unification Wars, the records concerning the 20th strain were guarded even more closely than those of the other legions. The Emperor had always maintained secrecy around the Space Marine project, yet the materials connected to this legion were hidden behind even stricter barriers. During those early years, the 20th Legion, together with the Proto-Legions that would later become the Salamanders and the Space Wolves, developed largely apart from the rest of the Legiones Astartes. It appeared that each of them had been formed with particular purposes in mind, though the nature of those purposes remained one of many secrets that the Emperor chose not to share. Even with members of the Imperial Court, or with many of his closest advisors. This separation created an atmosphere of suspicion between the legions, a quiet tension that never truly faded. Only the legion that would later be known as the Salamanders escaped that lasting distrust. In the case of the Alpha Legion, the distance only deepened over time, and from that first veil of secrecy, many further questions slowly emerged. Very little can be said with certainty about the earliest solar decades of the Legion while it remained on Terra and during the reconquest of the Sol system. Even the legends that later grew around its reputation are strangely absent from that period. What fragments remain speak only of isolated and unusual records, describing unidentified space marine units carrying out precise strikes, abductions, and assassinations both on Terra and beyond. These reports describe warriors who answered to no known legion, units that moved through war zones with unchallengeable clearance codes and orders that permitted no questioning. Their missions appeared suddenly and ended just as quickly, leaving little behind but brief traces in scattered archives. Even the name Alpha carries echoes from those earliest days. Some records connect the designation to the Proto-Legion from a very early stage, and while certain sources search for mystical meanings in the name, a more practical explanation lies in the Emperor's gene laboratories. During the creation of each legion, new gene seed strains were introduced in stages of testing and expansion. Each stage stage brought a larger group of recruits into the process, moving from small experimental trials toward broader implantation. The final stage of those trials was known as the Alpha Induction. In this stage, the implantation was no longer experimental and created a proto-legion strong enough to be tested openly in battle. Yet there is no evidence that the 20th gene seed strain ever progressed beyond this stage. Although the Emperor approved the strain after its early tests, there are no records showing that the Legion was expanded through mass recruitment or given an intake region on Terra, as other legions were during the early years of the Great Crusade. As a result, the Legion remained small, perhaps only a few thousand warriors, while other legions rapidly grew in strength. The reason for this restraint remains uncertain. Surviving records show that the gene seed itself was highly successful, far more stable than certain other strains that struggled with difficult genetic patterns. Battlefield reports also describe strong performance, leaving little reason to believe the Legion had failed in its trials. Several explanations have been suggested over the centuries. One theory suggests that the available recruits of suitable genetic stock had already been claimed by other legions, leaving too few candidates for further expansion after a disastrous attempt to recruit from tainted populations had been erased from official records. Another theory proposes that some hidden flaw had been discovered, though this explanation raises difficult questions about why the Emperor would allow such a problem to remain unresolved rather than eliminate a flawed project entirely. The final theory suggests something far more deliberate. According to this view, the 20th Proto-Legion was preserved as a separate and isolated force, perhaps held in reserve as a strategic resource or maintained as a control group, while other legions expanded across the stars. Some even suggest that it was kept apart so that further conditioning and development could be carried out in secrecy. Within that possibility lies an additional speculation that the lessons learned during the creation of this final Alpha Stage Legion eventually contributed to the formation of the Emperor's own transhuman guardians, the Legio Custodes. When the Great Crusade finally gathered momentum and the vast expeditionary fleets spread across the stars to reunite humanity, the 20th Legion slipped quietly from the official histories of the Imperium. For many decades, it seemed to vanish completely from the records, though faint traces of activity continued to appear in places that official reports could never fully explain. Some observers have long believed that the Legion continued to operate during those years, but in a role that was never openly acknowledged. The young Imperium was already facing dangers from within its own territories, hidden conspiracies, bitter survivors of the Unification Wars, and rebels who had retreated into secrecy while waiting for opportunities to strike again. Many of these enemies were driven by ambition or twisted by exposure to darker powers, and they quietly worked to undermine the imperial truth. For a time, the Imperium believed such threats could never truly reach its heart, yet that confidence was shaken during a troubling event involving the gene seed reserves of the Legion that would later become known as the Emperor's Children. During the early decades of the Crusade, a terrible viral blight corrupted their gene seed, an event that nearly doomed the Legion entirely. Around that same time, scattered reports began to appear, describing unidentified Space Marine forces acting far from the front lines of the Crusade. These operations were small and precise, carried out by detached units no larger than a squad or a company. The warriors involved were clearly Astartes, their strength, armor, and weapons leaving no doubt about their nature, yet their identity remained concealed. They carried few markings and sometimes wore unfamiliar heraldry that did not appear in official records. In stranger cases, these warriors operated beneath the colors of another legion, wearing its livery during operations that took place in war zones where the impersonated legion was already present, though that legion had no knowledge of their presence. Their missions followed a consistent pattern of covert action. Assassinations were carried out with precision, artifacts were seized, key individuals vanished without trace, and entire groups were quietly abducted for purposes that were never revealed. Such strikes occurred both on distant battlefronts and within worlds that had already sworn loyalty to the Imperium. Witnesses rarely survived these encounters, and the few protests raised by local commanders or planetary rulers were dismissed or ignored. In certain circles, these mysterious warriors became known as the Ghost Legion. Some officers within the Imperial High Command suspected that the 20th Legion lay behind these operations, yet as new Imperial institutions rose to prominence, including the Legio Custodes, the Securitas Inconsensus, and the Officio Assassinorum, the rumors surrounding the Ghost Legion slowly faded into uncertain legend. If such a force truly existed, it represented something unusual among the Legiones Astartes. Rather than fighting openly in grand campaigns, it appeared to wage a secret war that unfolded beside the Great Crusade rather than within it. For more than a century, such a legion could have been gathering knowledge, influence, and experience, while the rest of the Imperium focused on conquest across the stars. What it learned during those hidden years remains unknown, and even the question of why its role eventually changed remains unanswered. Perhaps the Imperium simply required more legions to fight openly on the expanding front lines. Perhaps the emergence of specialized Imperial agencies made such a secret force unnecessary. Or perhaps the Legion had become too unpredictable to remain entirely in the shadows. Whatever the truth, the coils of the Alpha Legion eventually rose from secrecy and began to appear openly within the Imperium. During the brutal conflicts remembered as the Rangdan Xenocides, a figure representing the 20th Legion came before the Primarch Lion L. Johnson. The warrior identified himself as Alpharius, though he openly acknowledged that the Legion's true Primarch had not yet been discovered and would be found in time. The meeting carried an unusual proposal. This Alpharius offered assistance against the Rangdan threat, while expressing a hope that one day Lionel Johnson might be chosen as the Imperial War Master. According to the emissary, the warriors of the 20th Legion believed the Lion would be better suited to the role than other candidates such as Robut Guilliman, because they shared similar views regarding war and secrecy. Even as a Primarch, Lionel Johnson had not been formally informed that the 20th Legion existed at all. What instead were only rumors, quiet stories circulating among commanders and officers about a mysterious ghost legion whose presence could never quite be confirmed. Accounts describing the first open appearance of the Alpha Legion often disagree in small but telling ways, leaving historians uncertain about the exact moment when the Legion stepped into the light of Imperial record. Some archives place its emergence during the solar decade that preceded the Tyranids extermination, while other sources describe it arriving unexpectedly as reinforcement during the darkest stages of the Third Rangdan Xenocide. This difference spans several decades and reinforces the sense that the Legion arrived later than any of its counterparts. It also became the final Legion to be publicly reunited with its Primarch, though even the details surrounding that reunion vary widely depending on the source consulted. The name chosen by the Legion carries its own quiet contradiction. Alpha, in ancient glyph forms, signifies the first or the beginning, and yet this legion appeared last among the Legiones Astartes. The Primarch who eventually led them bore a matching name, Alpharius, creating an irony that has intrigued scholars for centuries. Some historians believe that the choice was not ironic at all, but rather a declaration of ambition. The word alpha can also imply primacy and supremacy, particularly when paired with the ancient symbol of Omega and the pre-Dark Age sigil known as the Eternus. This sigil appeared in early heraldry of the Legion and held deeper meanings connected to unity, continuity, and indestructibility. Within its design lay the sacred geometry of an ancient serpent coiling around the pillars of physical reality and truth. Across countless cultures, the serpent has represented knowledge and hidden power, but it has also symbolized deception, treachery, and the quiet stirring of conflict. From those myths came the image of the Hydra, the many-headed creature that could never truly be destroyed because each severed head would give rise to two more. This creature would become the dominant symbol of the Alpha Legion by the time of the Horus Heresy, and within that symbol, observers have long seen layers of meaning tied to ambition, secrecy, and quiet menace. Among all the riddles that surround the Legion, none has provoked more speculation than the origins of its Primarch. Alpharius remains the least certain figure among the Primarchs who later fought during the Horus Heresy, and the stories describing his discovery vary in remarkable ways. One tale that circulated secretly within the Imperial Court tells of a chance encounter with the Luna Wolves Legion before the end of the Great Crusade. According to that account, Alpharius had become the leader of a confederation of human star systems whose fleet relied on cunning and ambush rather than raw strength. When one of the Luna Wolves' battleships entered their territory, it was brought down through deception and sudden attack. Horus himself responded to the defeat, leading his fleet in pursuit, only to find his forces repeatedly drawn into ambushes and traps among unfamiliar stars. The pursuit eventually led to a desperate engagement near the flagship Vengeful Spirit. During the battle, an assassin slipped aboard the vessel and fought his way through the elite Justaeran Guard until he reached Horus's command chamber itself. Rather than killing the intruder, Horus recognized him as a brother, the attacker revealed himself as Alpharius, explaining that he had spent many years traveling through that region of space. The worlds under his loose confederation soon joined the Imperium with little resistance, though Alpharius refused to name any of them as his true home. Another account drawn from the mind of a captured Alpha Legion Centurion tells a very different story. In that version, the Primarch fell upon a lifeless world near the Mandragoran stars, a dead planet whose ancient civilization had vanished long before humanity rose on Terra. There the young Primarch endured years of isolation among shattered ruins, surviving against harsh conditions and wandering spirits of the dead city. His solitude ended only when a corsair vessel of renegades and alien mercenaries crashed upon the world in search of forgotten treasures. Instead, they met their end at the hands of the Primarch, who claimed their weapons, their knowledge, and their vessel before setting out into the void in search of the Father who had created him. Other accounts preserved within suppressed writings known as the Codex Hydra offer further contradictions. One suggests that Alpharius grew upon a thriving world called Barsaver until the Slogged descended from the darkness of space. These worm-like Xenos captured the young Primarch and twisted his mind, using him as a weapon to sow discord across the worlds they intended to devour. In that telling, the Emperor himself eventually rescued his son, tearing open the alien vessel with divine fury and remaining beside Alpharius for many years as he restored what had been damaged. Yet another version claims that Alpharius was never scattered among the stars with his brothers at all. According to that story, he remained hidden near Terra, secretly raised and guided by the Emperor alone, while his existence was concealed from even the closest servants of the Imperium. Which of these stories carries truth remains uncertain. Records suggest that none can be fully trusted, and that each may simply be another carefully crafted illusion surrounding the Primarch's past. What is known is that Alpharius was eventually brought before the Emperor and formally reunited with his legion. The moment was marked by celebration and ceremony, though surviving records hint that father and son spent little time together afterwards. Many believed that by then the Emperor had already completed his search for the scattered Primarchs and had turned his attention to other matters of the Imperium. Others within the Legion suspected that their relationship carried deeper complexities, and some whispered quietly that Alpharius might not have been alone at all. Within the inner circles of the Legion, a secret was carefully preserved, one that remained hidden even from the other legions of the Imperium. Alpharius was not alone. He shared his nature and appearance with a twin brother named Omegon, and together the two served as the joint Primarchs of the 20th Legion. Both brothers were indistinguishable in form and presence, and it was believed that they shared a single soul between them. Omegon acted as the second in command of the Legion, though the truth of their dual existence remained known only to the legionaries themselves and to the Emperor who had discovered it. Under their leadership, the warriors of the Legion displayed many of the same qualities as their gene sire. They were tall and formidable, yet beneath their physical strength lay a sharp and calculating intelligence that reflected the cunning of their Primarch. When Alpharius and Omegon took command, the Legion proved eager and disciplined disciplined, fully committed to the strategic philosophy that guided its leaders. They led their warriors outward toward the distant edges of imperial space, where the Legion sought opportunities to prove itself beside the older and more celebrated legions. In battle, the Legion quickly earned a reputation for absolute coordination and strict internal organization. Individual heroism mattered little compared to the unity of the Legion as a whole, and every action emphasized the strength of the collective rather than the glory of a single warrior. This approach produced a terrifying level of coordination between infantry, armor, and supporting forces. Their combined arms warfare unfolded with speed and certainty, overwhelming enemies with carefully orchestrated strikes. Yet their mastery of open battle was matched by skill in the darker arts of war. Sabotage, ambush, stealth operations, and carefully planned assassinations became natural extensions of their doctrine. Even when fighting alongside other legions, the Alpha Legion maintained a quiet distance from its allies. Behind their disciplined exterior, many observers sensed a deeper willfulness, and sometimes even a hint of quiet mockery lingering beneath the surface of their carefully ordered ranks. Unlike the other Legiones Astartes, whose early character often reflected the cultures of Terra and the origins of their recruits, the Alpha Legion appeared to the Imperium as something far more unified and far more difficult to understand. Legionaries and Primarchs seemed almost indistinguishable from one another in purpose and presence, their shared hallmarks of unity and power accompanied by a persistent veil of confusion that surrounded every encounter outsiders had with them. From the beginning, there were almost no reliable records describing the Legion's true nature. Even the Imperialis Logistica struggled to confirm the most basic facts about them. Their recruitment worlds could not be verified, their heraldry remained uncertain, and their numbers could never be measured with confidence. The Legion seemed to have emerged already complete, as though it had stepped fully formed from the shadows with tens of thousands of armed warriors and a capable war fleet that moved with the calm assurance of veterans. Even the name by which they were known never seemed entirely fixed. The title, Alpha Legion, spread across Imperial records and battle reports, yet those same reports sometimes recorded the Legion operating under names it had chosen for itself. In some campaigns, it was called the Unbroken Chain, while in others it adopted darker titles, including the name the Harrowing during the Xenocidal Wars fought within the Perfidian Tap. Confusion deepened when the legionaries themselves spoke. Many accounts describe warriors of the 20th Legion introducing themselves simply as Alpharius when speaking with allies or commanders from other forces. At other times, they described themselves only as one among many. Such answers frustrated those who served beside them, and the meaning behind this anonymity remained uncertain. Some believed it reflected the Legion's intense commitment to unity, while others suspected a deliberate strategy meant to conceal their true numbers. Yet scattered reports suggested a different practice as well. Investigators later discovered that some legionaries used names drawn from ancient dialects long thought lost. During one engagement alongside the Clarkash Imperialis Auxilia against the Grave at Memlock, The names and code words spoken among the Alpha Legion battalion were later found to match exactly the population registry of a human world the Legion itself had previously exterminated. Why such a practice existed remained unknown, and no clear explanation was ever recorded. Deception in its many forms seemed to be quietly tolerated by imperial authority. The Emperor himself allowed it, and later the War Master Horus did the same. In battle, the Legion demonstrated a strange and unsettling mastery, combining subtle planning with overwhelming violence. Their strategies often began with quiet infiltration, espionage, and careful sabotage, methods that earned them a reputation rivaled only by the Raven Guard. Yet where the Raven Guard preferred stealth to reduce suffering and spare the populations they liberated, the Alpha Legion appeared to treat these tactics differently. For them, such covert actions often felt like the opening movements of a darker game. Confusion and disorder spread across their enemies long before any open battle began, leaving armies uncertain of who to trust and forcing commanders to chase threats that were never quite where they appeared to be. Enemies bled slowly under these pressures, rumors spread through their ranks, supplies vanished, communications failed, and allies sometimes turned against one another in panic. Only when their victims were weakened and disoriented did the Legion strike openly. The moment they called the Harrowing often arrived without warning, as assaults erupted from countless directions at once, each attack using different tactics while the enemy struggled to understand what was happening around them. What followed rarely resembled ordinary battle. With their opponents already pushed toward chaos and collapse, the full strength of the Legion descended upon the weakest points of resistance. Observers sometimes described these moments less as warfare and more as a calculated act of slaughter. To allies, the Legion remained a shifting and uncertain presence. Its warriors possessed undeniable strength, yet their constant secrecy and refusal to reveal their intentions created unease wherever they fought. To their enemies, they became something far worse, a foe that seemed able to appear from any direction and strike precisely at hidden weaknesses. Despite the mistrust surrounding them, their victories accumulated quickly. The Legion studied the strengths and weaknesses of its fellow legions with careful attention, adapting weapons and strategies wherever they proved useful. In this respect, their approach resembled the strategic discipline of the Ultramarines under Robert Man, though the Lord of Ultramar himself would likely have rejected such a comparison. As the years of the Great Crusade continued, the Alpha Legion's determination to prove itself often led it toward increasingly elaborate methods of war. Their campaigns sometimes became unnecessarily complex and cruel, and their reputation shifted toward infamy rather than admiration. Distrust deepened between the Legion and many of its peers. Disputes eventually emerged with several Primarchs. Conflicts of authority arose with Man and with Mortarion of the Death Guard during later campaigns, including tensions following the Ulanor Crusade and again during the Phasaelius uprisings. Rogaldorn of the Imperial Fists expressed open contempt for the Legion, describing them as an honorless assassin unworthy to bear the Emperor's mark. only the direct intervention of the Emperor prevented a formal duel between officers of the two legions after the fall of the fortress of Chicala during the Avalorn Compliance. Other Primarchs also spoke harshly of them. Conrad Kersey condemned the legion in secret records kept by the Legio Custodes, accusing them of hiding darker crimes behind layers of deception. Even the Thousand Sons appeared to avoid contact with them when possible, though the reason for that distance was never clearly recorded. One Primarch did regard them differently. Horus saw the Alpha Legion as a valuable and unique weapon within the Imperium. Their ambition impressed him, and their methods were not so distant from the strategic thinking of his own legion. The Alpha Legion also fought successfully beside other legions on several occasions. Campaigns alongside the Dark Angels and the Iron Hands proceeded without notable conflict before the Horus Heresy began. The Legion also demonstrated unusual skill in integrating non-Legion forces into its battle plans, although it often spent the lives of those allies with cold calculation when necessary. Beyond these controversies stood a clear record of military success. The Legion proved highly effective at forcing reluctant human worlds into Imperial compliance. It became known for exposing hidden rebellions on newly compliant planets, and it pursued warp-capable raiders, nomadic Xenos threats, and renegade human forces with relentless determination. After Horus rose to the rank of Imperial War Master and assumed control of the Crusades' outward campaigns, the Alpha Legion found itself granted an unusual degree of independence. The War Master allowed them to operate apart from other Legiones Astartes formations, trusting their ability to wage war across distant regions of the galaxy. During this period, the Legion expanded rapidly. Its warriors formed the core of several expeditionary fleets, and many of its forces divided into smaller raiding groups that ranged far beyond the edges of known Imperial territory. These deep-range operations sometimes unfolded alongside rogue traders, carrying the Legion's presence into regions far beyond the Crusades' established front lines. Yet as the years passed, even Horus began to question how firmly he truly controlled them. Fragmentary reports prepared for both the War Master and the Imperial Court on Terra suggested growing unease regarding the Legion's actions. Observers wondered whether the Imperium still possessed the ability to measure its strength or fully understand its intentions. Some reports hinted that a strange obsession had begun to shape the Legion's approach to war. Instead of choosing battles that served the needs of the Great Crusade, they appeared increasingly drawn toward conflicts that offered a challenge to their methods. Their campaigns sometimes became elaborate displays of destruction, where their complex strategies unfolded even when a simpler attack could have achieved victory more quickly. One of the most notorious examples occurred upon the world of Testra Prime. Rather than seize the planetary capital and force immediate surrender, the Legion allowed the defenders time to fortify their positions. Over the course of a solar week, the defenders endured a constant pattern of sabotage, ambush, and sudden disaster. Equipment failed, soldiers disappeared in the darkness, and every defensive line seemed to weaken in unexpected ways. When the defenders finally surrendered, they had suffered catastrophic losses, with almost all of their forces destroyed. Later, when Alpharius was asked why the Legion had not chosen the simpler path of swift conquest, he answered quietly that the easier victory had been avoided because it would have been too easy. Such conduct provoked strong condemnation among the Primarchs. Keelyman in particular protested the campaign in formal terms, describing it as an exercise in cruelty that wasted both time and resources of the Great Crusade. After that dispute, the Ultramarines would no longer fight alongside the Alpha Legion during the Crusade. Across the Imperium, accusations grew more common. Commanders and officials increasingly believed that the Legion had developed a fascination with bringing down civilizations through chaos and destruction, even when negotiation or a limited display of force could have secured compliance more cleanly. Some observers suggested that this behavior had become more than preference, that it reflected a deeper flaw growing within the Legion itself. They feared that the elaborate destruction of their enemies had become an obsession that worsened as the Crusade continued. Horus rejected such accusations and dismissed them openly. As suspicion gathered around them, the Alpha Legion withdrew further toward the distant fringes of known space. Their presence became less visible within the Imperium's central campaigns, though this retreat itself appeared to be another layer of misdirection. Across those dark regions, their agents adopted new names and identities, spreading deception wherever they traveled. Many of those who encountered them in the distant void never realized which legion had destroyed them until the moment it was already too late. Looking back upon the records of the Great Crusade, it can appear almost inevitable that the Alpha Legion would eventually stand beside Horus when he rebelled against the Emperor. Their pride in war and the distance Alpharius kept from most of his brother Primarchs created an image of a legion already apart from the rest. Yet the moment that set their path was stranger than simple rebellion. During the campaign of Imperial compliance on the world of North, some 2 standard years before the Civil War began, the twin Primarchs encountered a man named John Grammaticus. He served as an agent for an alien organization known as the Cabal. Through him, the Cabal approached Alpharius and Omegon, along with 2 other individuals named Pito Soneca and a psyker called Sheer. They revealed a vision of the future shaped by psychic foresight. In that vision, the appointment of Horus as War Master would lead inevitably to a vast interstellar civil war, remembered as the Horus Heresy. The Cabal then showed the Primarchs 2 possible outcomes of that coming conflict. In the first vision, the Emperor triumphed over Horus. Yet victory would not bring peace. Humanity would slowly decline across many millennia, and in time, the Imperium, along with uncounted billions of souls, would be consumed by the growing power of chaos. The second vision followed a darker path. If Horus won the war and slew the Emperor, the War Master would later be overwhelmed by remorse. In the generations that followed, he would wage endless war across the galaxy, destroying every force touched by chaos, and ultimately destroying humanity itself in the process. Yet the destruction of humanity would also weaken the Chaos Gods, whose strength fed upon the psychic nature of mankind. Faced with these visions, the twin Primarchs ranks reacted with shock and anger, crying out that the Alpha Legion had always served the Emperor. In the end, they chose to follow Horus not out of betrayal, but because they believed the destruction of chaos was the outcome the Emperor himself might have chosen. Thus, the legions swore allegiance to chaos undivided, while believing that their true loyalty remained with the Emperor. Whether the Cabal truly sought to prevent the stagnation and endless warfare of the Imperium, or whether it had misled the Primarchs entirely, has never been clearly understood. By supporting Horus, the Alpha Legion may have helped create the future it hoped to avoid. Some believe the Cabal misread the visions and unknowingly shaped a self-fulfilling prophecy. Others suspect that darker powers manipulated the events, ensuring that the Legion's decision would serve another hidden design. Even so, the Legion's battle cry remained unchanged. When its warriors shout the words for the Emperor, it may not be a mocking insult as many once believed. Instead, it may reflect a strange and enduring belief that their long and hidden war still serves the Emperor's ultimate cause. Among those who study the Legion's actions today, some believe its true aim may be to free the Emperor from his prison upon the Golden Throne, fulfilling the path once revealed to them long ago. When the Horus Heresy finally erupted and the atrocity upon Istvan became known, a powerful Alpha Legion strike force stood ready within Imperial space. Nearly 50,000 legionaries served within this formation under the direct command of their Primarch, their fleets having recently returned from distant campaigns fought along the northeastern galactic frontier. Those forces had withdrawn briefly to resupply and rearm at the Forge world of Lucius. From there, they were positioned close enough to receive the command issued by Rogel Dorn, who ordered loyal legions to gather and strike against the traitors assembling upon Istvan. Dorn believed the Alpha Legion remained loyal. For several years, they had been distant from the core campaigns of the Crusade, and their long absence from Imperial affairs suggested they could not have been involved in the treachery spreading among Horus's allies. Yet the truth proved far darker. When the drop site massacre unfolded, the Alpha Legion revealed its allegiance to the War Master. Some later accounts even claim that Alpharius himself may have contributed to the planning of that terrible betrayal, though such claims remain uncertain. Long before the first battles of the Civil War began, the Legion had already spread its network of infiltration and sabotage across the Imperium. Agents worked quietly upon many worlds, embedding themselves within governments, armies, and vital infrastructure. When Horus finally unleashed the Legion's hidden plans, those networks erupted into action. Worlds far from the main battlefield suddenly collapsed into confusion and violence. Billions of lives were lost in uprisings, sabotage, and disaster, as the Imperium struggled to understand the scale of the conspiracy. Even planets that never witnessed the arrival of Astartes' armies felt the consequences of those hidden wars. The Alpha Legion's talent for manipulation and strife spread suffering across distant systems, weakening the Imperium long before the main campaigns of the Heresy reached them. Despite unleashing this weapon upon the galaxy, Horus himself never fully trusted the Legion or its Primarch. He feared that once the Hydra had been set free, it might follow its own path, rather than the one he intended. As the long war continued, that fear would prove difficult to dismiss. After the virus bombing on Istvan III, the Alpha Legion was believed to stand with the Emperor, and so the Legion was sent alongside other loyal forces toward Istvan V, where Horus and the traitor legions had gathered. Assigned to arrive as part of the second wave of the assault, their true allegiance revealed itself at the moment when the first wave of loyal warriors had already descended to the surface, and the Alpha Legion turned their weapons upon them during the disaster that later came to be remembered as the Drop Site Massacre. The slaughter that followed was terrible and long remembered, as the Iron Hands, Salamanders, and Raven Guard suffered devastating losses that shattered their strength and scattered their surviving warriors across the blackened battlefield. Ferrus Manus fell there beneath the blade of Fulgrim of the Emperor's children, while Vulcan vanished amid the ruin, and Corax endured severe wounds as his legion struggled to escape annihilation. For many weeks afterward, the remnants of the Raven Guard were relentlessly pursued through the void and across the broken landscapes of war by the savage World Eaters, whose fury seemed boundless as they hunted their weakened enemies. Corax and the survivors prepared themselves for a final stand, believing that the last of their strength would soon be spent. Yet their fate changed when a rescue force of Raven Guard craft arrived and carried the survivors away from destruction. By this time, the Alpha Legion had already gained a reputation across the Imperium for subtle deception and extraordinary infiltration, moving unseen within enemy ranks while gathering knowledge, spreading confusion, and planting seeds of disinformation wherever they traveled. During the earliest stages of the Great Conflict, they used these talents to slip agents among the Raven Guard themselves, quietly observing Corax and learning of the efforts to rebuild the shattered Legion. On the Moon of Deliverance, the wounded Primarch began experiments, using pure Primarch genetic material granted to him by the Emperor, hoping to restore his legion with new warriors born from that precious source. Hidden Alpha Legion operatives waited patiently within the ranks of the Raven Guard until the moment when the experiments finally showed promise, and then they corrupted the genetic work so that the new aspirants were twisted into grotesque forms that horrified those who had hoped for renewal. At the same time, unrest began to grow within the ancient dead guilds of nearby Kievar, where rebellion spread through careful manipulation while Alpha Legion forces gathered nearby under the guise of Raven Guard allies. The uprising was eventually crushed and the infiltrators uncovered, though not before the Alpha Legion had already secured the data they desired and passed fragments of it onward to the Emperor's children apothecary Fabius, while secretly withholding the most vital knowledge for their own future plans. In the quiet aftermath of those events, Omegon met with a representative of the mysterious Cabal and declared that the Legion would pursue its own course without further guidance or interference from that hidden council. Soon afterward, the Alpha Legion turned its attention toward the White Scars who still lingered within the contact system, unaware that the galaxy had already fallen into the chaos of the Horus Heresy. A distant asteroid facility known as Tenebrae 950 served as a garrison for Alpha Legion forces, who used powerful devices to block all communications and keep the White Scars isolated from the truth. Yet a small team led by Sheed Rango was sent upon a mission from which they were never meant to return, destroying the installation and allowing word of the rebellion to reach the fleet of Jagatai Khan. When the White Scars prepared to leave the system, they found themselves surrounded by a silent and watchful Alpha Legion flotilla that had gathered across the void without answering any hail or challenge. The White Scars maneuvered carefully through the dense standoff and broke through the encirclement with a sudden and precise assault, escaping contacts even though the Alpha Legion never fully committed its heavier warships to prevent their departure. Soon afterward, the Alpha Legion turned its attention toward the battered fleet of the Space Wolves within the Alaxis Nebula, where Lamon Russ had withdrawn after the destruction of Prospero. Old bitterness lingered between the two legions, as Russ had long mocked the Alpha Legion's reliance on deception and subtle strategy rather than open battle. Now the sons of Alpharius sought an opportunity to prove their superiority by delaying the wolves and preventing them from aiding the defense of Terra. The White Scars heard the desperate signal from the Space Wolves, yet Jagatai Khan remained uncertain about the true loyalties of the forces involved and chose not to intervene until the confusion of conflicting messages could be untangled. While the Khan sought clarity, the fleet of Layman Russ struggled alone against the larger Alpha Legion armada that pressed them from every direction within the Alaxis Nebula. Russ withdrew into solitude during those dark hours, leaving command of the fleet to his first captain while the wolves endured constant attack and mounting losses. When the moment seemed most desperate, the Primarch returned to lead his warriors personally. And during the height of the battle, a force of Alpha Legion Cataphracti Terminators suddenly appeared upon the bridge of Russ's flagship, where the Wolf King confronted a warrior believed to be Alpharius hidden among them. The conflict might have ended there in defeat for the wolves, yet an unexpected fleet arrived from the Dark Angels, led by a vast mobile star fortress known as the Chimera. With the arrival of these allies, the tide of battle shifted, and the Alpha Legion withdrew from the nebula after their assault failed to destroy the isolated legion of Fenris. Elsewhere within the shadows of the war, another strange encounter unfolded around a vessel called the Sisypheum, where witnesses later described the presence of one of the Alpha Legion Primarchs upon a hidden installation known as Lerna 212. Disguised as the Iron Hands war leader Shadrach Medusin, the Primarch manipulated the crew and hunted for loyal elements within his own legion until the deception was finally uncovered and the survivors escaped with knowledge of the ruse. Throughout the Civil War, the Alpha Legion continued to rely on a vast network of agents, operatives, and bonded servants scattered across countless worlds, enabling them to move supplies and warriors between distant sectors even as the Imperium collapsed into chaos. Such reach allowed them to place hidden assets upon Terra itself, where the Imperial Fists and Rogel Dorn had begun transforming the Sol system into an immense defensive fortress in preparation for the War Master's inevitable assault. Among the many methods used by the Legion was a complex system of mission parameters given to infiltrators before deployment. allowing a single warrior to pursue entirely different goals depending on a word or phrase spoken across a Fox channel or written upon a simple scrap of parchment. Because of this method, even members of the same force might follow entirely different objectives while believing they served the same greater plan. Eventually, the Alpha Legion succeeded in placing agents within the Imperial Palace itself, slipping into the Investiary where statues of the Primarchs commemorated the triumphs of the Great Crusade. 2 empty plinths stood there where the lost Primarchs had once been honored, while the statues of those who had rebelled remained hidden beneath coverings, and it was these monuments that became the strange focus of the infiltrators' sabotage. The agents destroyed every statue in that sacred chamber, except the figures of Alpharius and Rogal Dorn, leaving the act as a silent challenge directed at the Praetorian of Terra. The deed was concealed from most within the palace, and even the Emperor's own guardians were forbidden to enter and witness the insult that had been carried out within their walls. Soon afterward, an Alpha Legion fleet, led by Harrow Master Kel Salonius, struck at the outer defenses of the Sol system and seized several moons of Pluto that formed a critical part of the Loyalist surveillance network. Much of what occurred during that assault remained secret, guarded closely by Rogal Dorn and his trusted warriors. At the same time, Alpharius prepared a far more subtle approach, placing his fleet into stasis and allowing the vessels to drift slowly toward the heart of the system, with engines nearly silent so that their heat signatures would remain hidden. For an entire year, the fleet crept forward through the darkness until it reached the outer edge of Terra's defenses without being detected. Across the system, hidden sleeper cells of human agents and covert Alpha Legion teams suddenly awakened, spreading sabotage and terror across multiple worlds to distract the defenders from the true objective of the invasion. Amid this chaos, the fleet of Alpharius struck Pluto with overwhelming strength, unleashing hidden fire ships and capturing the fortress moon Kerberos, while the astropathic monitoring station on Hydra became the central target of the assault. Despite being heavily outnumbered, the defenders led by Sigismund of the Imperial Fists resisted fiercely while the captured guns of Kerberos rained destruction upon nearby moons. Through the confusion and violence of the battle, the Alpha Legion pressed toward Hydra, seeking to cripple the Imperium's ability to watch the void around Terra. As the fighting around Pluto intensified, Archimus, the master of Rogal Dorn's Huskarls, finally recognized that the true purpose of the attack was the destruction of the astropathic monitoring station upon Hydra. Leading a small force of his warriors, he struck directly at the Alpha Legion detachment commanded by Alpharius, though the clash left the Huskarls slain and Archimus mortally wounded, while the battle seemed ready to fall to the traitor forces. At that moment, the massive Star Fortress phalanx arrived with Rogal Dorn and a powerful fleet of Imperial warships that had been accelerated through the solar gravity wells to reach Pluto with astonishing speed. The reinforcements quickly silenced the captured guns on Kerberos, while Dorn and his remaining Huskarls teleported into the chamber on Hydra, where Alpharius waited with his elite Terminators. Archimus watched the final moments as the two Primarchs confronted one another amid the shattered machinery of the astropathic station, their battle unfolding in a brutal struggle for survival. When Alpharius raised the pale spear to deliver what appeared to be a killing strike, Dorn stepped forward to take the blow upon his shoulder, trapping the weapon in place and seizing the moment to counter. With Storm's teeth roaring in his grasp, Dorn severed his brother's hands and struck him down with a final series of savage blows before driving the spear through his body. The duel ended with a crushing strike that shattered Alpharius' skull, and with the fall of their Primarch, the Alpha Legion fleet withdrew from the battlefield around Pluto. Far away, Omegon sensed the death of his twin in that instant, and when the War Master demanded a report from Alpharius, he quietly assumed his brother's name as he had done before, becoming the sole bearer of that identity within the Legion. From that point forward, the Alpha Legion continued its role in the war without openly joining the Great Assault on Terra. Instead, the Legion scattered into a series of delaying actions across distant battlefields, striking isolated forces and preventing reinforcements from reaching the throne world in time for the final struggle. Among these engagements, they defeated a White Scar's force on Talarn, and later struck against a Space Wolves detachment at Eront, while the siege of Terra unfolded far away. In the end, the war reached its terrible conclusion when Horus was slain by the Emperor aboard the War Master's own battle barge during the final moments of the siege. The Great Rebellion collapsed soon afterward, leaving the shattered Imperium to reckon with the scars left by the long and bitter conflict. When the Horus Heresy ended and the traitor legions fled into the Eye of Terror, the Alpha Legion chose a different path and moved eastward across the galaxy while pursuing their own mysterious objectives. Because they did not withdraw into the warp alongside their allies, they soon encountered Ultramarines' forces that were already operating within that region following the War Master's assault upon Terra. The two legions eventually clashed on the world of Escrador, where Alpharius welcomed the confrontation, believing the battle would demonstrate the brilliance of his flexible and deceptive strategies against the rigid doctrines of the Ultramarines. Robot Guilliman, however, anticipated that Alpharius would attempt to predict his tactics, and so the Primarch deliberately abandoned his own established methods in order to deceive the Alpha Legion. At first, the battle between the two legions became a tense stalemate. Then, during the night, Guilliman launched a surprise move, leading a large force deep into the mountains. His warriors, deployed by Thunderhawks, dropped pods, and teleporters directly inside Alpha Legion positions. The sudden attack threw the Alpha Legion's command structure into chaos as the Ultramarines advanced with overwhelming numbers. Cut off within the narrow mountain valley and unable to retreat through the difficult terrain, the Alpha Legion made a desperate stand while Alpharius personally led a fierce counterattack against Guilliman's advancing warriors. In the midst of that struggle, the Primarch of the Ultramarines slew Alpharius in single combat. Though uncertainty has lingered ever since about whether the fallen warrior was truly Omegon, or perhaps another legionary bearing the armor of his Primarch. After the body was burned upon a funeral pyre, the Ultramarines continued their pursuit. Yet instead of collapsing, the Alpha Legion responded with a series of precise and devastating counter-strikes that harried the Loyalists relentlessly. The losses suffered by the Ultramarines during those sudden reversals became so severe that Guilliman eventually abandoned hopes of a clean victory and ordered a massive orbital bombardment before withdrawing from Escrador. Some observers later suggested that the entire campaign might itself have been another elaborate stratagem by the Alpha Legion, though the purpose of such a design was never clearly understood. What remained certain was that the Legion behaved much like the Hydra symbol upon their armor. For every time a single head seemed to fall, another rose somewhere else within the galaxy. After Escrador, the Alpha Legion fractured into many small war bands that vanished into hidden bases among asteroid fields, drifting space hulks, and distant uninhabited worlds scattered throughout Imperial space. These independent forces continued to launch sudden raids against weakened military targets and to nurture secret cults devoted to the powers of chaos, often provoking rebellions that forced Imperial defenders to abandon more strategic positions. Unlike many other traitor legions, most of the Alpha Legion did not dwell permanently within the warp, and their scattered warbands roamed the galaxy, pursuing their secret objectives with a high degree of independence. Because of this unusual existence, the Legion was largely spared the grotesque mutations that marked many servants of chaos, a circumstance that some have quietly suggested might hint at a deeper loyalty hidden beneath their many layers of deception. The Inquisition, particularly the Ordo Malleus and the Ordo Hereticus, devoted immense effort to tracking these elusive enemies and destroying their hidden strongholds wherever they could be found. Even so, the Alpha Legion has repeatedly resurfaced after being declared extinct by the High Lords of Terra on several different occasions, proving time and again that the Hydra still lives and that new heads continue to rise wherever its enemies believe it has finally been slain. Those who observe the Alpha Legion too closely soon learn that appearances are rarely reliable. Their warriors move through many identities and wear many outward forms while pursuing the quiet and patient designs that define their campaigns. Yet, when the moment finally arrives for open war, when concealment is no longer useful and the final strike approaches, they step forward in the colors of their Primarch Alpharius. In that moment, the shifting disguises fall away and the Legion reveals the armor that marks its true allegiance. Battleplate often carries patterns shaped like the scales of serpents, subtle designs that ripple across the surface of ceramite with quiet purpose. Some warriors carry the same symbols beneath their skin in the form of tattoos, marks hidden from sight unless the bearer chooses to reveal them. Such signs are rarely meant for display or admiration, and the Legion shows little interest in decoration meant purely to impress. Their appearance tends toward restraint rather than spectacle, and even their symbols seem chosen with a careful sense of unity rather than personal distinction. Where other Chaos Space Marine forces may indulge in extravagant trophies or displays of status, the Alpha Legion presents a quieter and more disciplined face. Their warriors appear as parts of a greater whole, and the shared identity of the Legion itself seems to matter more than the pride of any single champion. Unlike many of the other traitor legions who reshaped their appearance after turning against the Imperium, the Alpha Legion largely preserved the colors it had worn since its earliest days. armor continued to bear the familiar tones of azure blue alongside silver and green, a quiet sign that in spirit the Legion believed itself little changed since the time of its creation. Within these colors, the warriors of the Legion often displayed subtle variations. A typical suit of armor might blend sea blue with emerald green, the tones sometimes softened beneath the dust and grime of campaign, and at other times polished until the colors clashed sharply in the light. The brilliance could serve a purpose of its own, drawing the attention of watching enemies while other movements unfolded unnoticed elsewhere. Among the more distinctive garments worn by certain operatives were cloaks patterned like serpent scales, items that carried significance within the Legion itself. When one warrior fell, another might take up the same mantle and wear it in his place, not as a personal trophy, but as something carried forward in the name of the Legion. Curiously, these cloaks were not always granted to those of high standing. Within some warbands, they were worn by the least favored or most inexperienced warriors, because obvious signs of importance tended to attract the careful aim of enemy marksmen. The Alpha Legion held little respect for such predictable thinking, and often arranged its symbols in ways that quietly challenged those expectations. The wider question of the Legion's heraldry and colors has long puzzled those who have tried to study its history. During the long years of the Great Crusade, many of the legions that departed Terra in plain gray armor gradually altered their appearance, especially after they were reunited with their Primarchs and reshaped by the demands of long campaigns across the stars. Even so, the sheer scale of a Space Marine Legion meant that perfect uniformity was nearly impossible to maintain. Tens of thousands of warriors were scattered across immense distances, fighting in separate expeditionary fleets that often developed their own small variations in appearance and markings. Yet the Alpha Legion displayed a degree of variation far beyond what distance alone could explain. Across different eras and battlefields, they were seen wearing armor of pale gray, gleaming steel, deep viridian, dull bronze, sable, indigo, amaranth, and the familiar azure blue, sometimes worn alone and sometimes blended together in shifting combinations. Their markings could be equally unpredictable. Some records describe the use of standardized ranked symbols following the Principia Bellicosa, while others note elaborate reptilian iconography whose meaning remains unknown. In still other cases, the Legion adopted complex forms, resembling the ancient Logos Technica of the shattered Pan-Pacific Empire that once existed on Terra before unification. At times, the Legion abandoned markings entirely, appearing on the battlefield without emblems or heraldry of any kind. In such moments, they resembled a silent and anonymous host of killers, moving without visible distinction or division among their ranks. Observers have long wondered whether these constant changes carried a deeper meaning beyond simple deception. One unsettling theory, discussed since the time of the Horus Heresy, suggests that even the Legion itself may not have fully known its own true structure. According to this idea, only Alpharius understood the full extent of the Legion's reach, its strength, and the hidden networks that bound its forces together. and even he may have possessed only an imperfect understanding of the vast design he had set in motion. If this were true, the Alpha Legion would have become something larger than the individual warriors who composed it, a force capable of sustaining itself and replicating its own methods across countless hidden cells. In such a state, its true limits would remain forever uncertain, and any attempt to infiltrate or destroy it from within would be endlessly frustrated. Even before the outbreak of the Horus Heresy, it was said that entire generations of Alpha Legion warriors might live and die without ever understanding the broader purposes guiding their legion. Whole expeditionary fleets could operate in isolation, unaware that other fleets bearing the same name existed elsewhere in the void. Each group might believe itself to be the sole true bearer of the Legion's identity, and if such deceptions truly existed, the scale of that hidden design would be difficult for any outsider to fully comprehend. In its earliest years, the Alpha Legion bore a symbol that traced its origin to an ancient script of Terra known as Epilogue. From this script came the familiar Alpha and Omega sign, an emblem adopted by the Legion during the early years of the Great Crusade and displayed across its armor and banners. Many of the other icons used by the Legion during this time appeared to draw from the same ancient writing. Variations of the Halic, Gamma, Omega, and Delta symbols were sometimes employed as identifiers for different formations within the Legion, though their use was rarely applied with strict consistency. As the years passed and the galaxy drifted toward the great conflict that would become the Horus Heresy, the Legion's emblem slowly changed. The older symbols were joined and eventually overshadowed by the image of a three-headed Hydra, a creature drawn from Terran myth, whose severed heads were said to grow back twofold whenever one was cut away. This Hydra icon often appeared above the earlier Alpha and Omega device, sometimes shown chained beneath the rising serpent. Both symbols continued to exist together, forming layered combinations that decorated armor plates, war banners, and the flanks of armored vehicles moving through the battle lines of the Legion. Among the many legions that turned against the Imperium and later made their homes within the Eye of Terror, the Alpha Legion stands apart in one quiet and curious way. Their gene seed does not appear to suffer from the heavy, warping influence of chaos that so often twists the bodies of other traitor legions, and yet signs of mutation have still been observed within their ranks. Whether these irregularities were present long before the great betrayal of the Horus Heresy remains uncertain, and if such flaws existed in earlier days, they were never openly revealed to the wider Imperium. Concealment would hardly be surprising, for secrecy has always been woven deeply into the nature of the Legion, shaping both their conduct in war and the careful way they reveal only what they wish others to see. There is one battle, remembered during the long and violent years of the Gothic War, that offers a rare glimpse into this strange relationship between mutation and deception. It is known as the Lethe Ambush, a clash in which observers recorded an unsettling detail about the warriors of the Alpha Legion who fought there. Some among them bore warped limbs or altered flesh, yet these changes were not displayed openly on the battlefield. Instead, The legionaries concealed their altered forms beneath armor and careful posture, hiding the distortions of their bodies, not from shame or hesitation, but as another deliberate layer of misdirection. Only when they closed the distance with their enemies did these hidden mutations reveal themselves, appearing suddenly in the final moments before the strike. In that instant, the revelation carried a cruel advantage, for the sight of those warped forms created shock and revulsion among those who faced them, adding confusion and dread to the already brutal chaos of battle. The warriors of the Alpha Legion lived according to the careful principles set down by their Primarch, who believed that only deliberate planning and precise coordination could guide any force toward its final objective. Within the Legion, this idea shaped nearly every action they took, and over time it encouraged many different elements to move together with quiet unity, forming a cohesive presence capable of approaching any problem from several directions at once. Because of this outlook, the Legion learned to treat strategy as something shared rather than something held by a single commander alone. When many minds worked toward the same purpose, alternatives appeared naturally, and the Legion could shift its approach with patience and calculation until a path forward revealed itself. Across the long centuries, this doctrine settled deeply into the culture of the Legion, becoming not merely a method of war, but a habit of thought. Even in the earliest days when the Space Marine Legions first took form, the trials awaiting new recruits were severe and demanding, intended to test endurance and resolve in ways that few could easily withstand. Within the Alpha Legion, these trials were unusual because candidates were not judged as individuals, but as members of a single group that rose or fell together. Entire squads faced their trials side by side, and success only existed when every member completed the task. If even one faltered, the attempt ended in failure for them all, and reckless displays of personal glory were discouraged because the broader design always mattered more than the courage of any single warrior. This emphasis on unity extended beyond training and into the physical appearance of the Legion itself. The first generation of Alpha Legionaries stood unusually tall and strong, even among the Astartes, and these features quietly supported the Primarch's fascination with misdirection and disguise. Alpharius ordered that, wherever possible, the warriors of the Legion should resemble one another and echo his own appearance as well as that of his twin, Omegon. Over time, this created a strange visual uniformity among the Legion, where shaven heads became common, and some warriors even altered their features through cosmetic surgery so that differences faded into something less noticeable. Their height and bearing meant that from a distance, many of them might easily be mistaken for the Primarch himself, though the twin Primarchs still stood taller than any of their sons. When outsiders asked for a name, every warrior answered the same way, calmly identifying himself as Alpharius, even when several stood together within the same gathering. Behind this practice lay a deeper belief that the Legion was not a collection of separate warriors, but a single body capable of striking in many places at once. The same spirit of shared purpose shaped the way decisions were made among them, because discussion within the Legion was unusually open, and many voices were invited to speak during planning. Warriors of every rank could offer thoughts during these quiet councils, and even the Legion's human operatives were permitted to share their ideas freely while strategies were considered. These gatherings did not remain limited to military matters alone, since the Legion sometimes explored questions of philosophy and the direction of the wider galaxy, subjects that would often have been discouraged or forbidden within other imperial institutions. When new recruits were later chosen for the ranks of the Legion, the Primarch looked less for simple physical strength and more for qualities of sharp intelligence and personal initiative. Those who possessed these traits were drawn into the Legion's culture of careful thought and subtle cooperation, where planning, patience, and unity were valued as deeply as strength in battle. When Alpharius was finally discovered, long after the Emperor had already completed his great journey to reclaim the scattered Primarchs, their meeting carried a distant and formal air that never quite softened with time. Those outside the ranks of the 20th Legion often believed that the Emperor's attention had already moved elsewhere, and that the reunion came too late to form the bond seen between other Primarchs and their creator. Yet within the Legion itself there were quiet suspicions that the truth was more complicated, and that Alpharius himself was a figure whose nature was not easily understood. Among the legionaries, whispers sometimes passed between warriors that their Primarch was not alone, but one of two twins so alike that even careful eyes struggled to distinguish them. Many members of the Legion shared an unsettling similarity of appearance and manner, and Alpharius turned this resemblance into a tool of misdirection, allowing the legend to grow that he could appear in two distant places at the same time. For those who served him closely, such claims carried more than a hint of truth. Unlike most Primarchs, whose towering presence set them apart even among the superhuman warriors of the Legiones Astartes, Alpharius was not greatly larger than the battle brothers who followed him into war. Because of this, he could move among them unnoticed when it suited his designs, assuming the identity of a common legionary, while another warrior claimed to be Alpharius in his place. In moments of confusion, many enemies believed they had discovered the Primarch himself, only to find that the figure before them was simply another soldier of the Legion. Over time, this habit of deception spread across the entire force, becoming part of its living character. A warrior might proclaim himself Alpharius simply to mislead an opponent, while another might carry out the true will of the Legion from behind the anonymity of a line soldier's armor. In this strange echo of their Primarch, every member of the Legion becomes, in some sense, a reflection of the same hidden origin. This enduring pattern of misdirection continues to shape the Legion's conduct long after those early days. A warlord who appears to lead from the front may in truth be a newly initiated recruit, while somewhere among the ranks a quiet warrior with a bolter might be directing a campaign that stretches across an entire sector of space. Through such layered deception, the Legion honors its symbol and repeats its ancient cry of Hydra Dominatus, leaving its enemies searching in vain for a single head to strike. Before the great betrayal that would divide the Imperium, the Alpha Legion approached warfare with a method that valued movement, flexibility, and the careful placement of force. Their commanders preferred to begin a campaign with small reconnaissance and infiltration units, warriors trained to slip quietly into contested regions and observe the shifting patterns of an enemy's defenses. These first movements were rarely dramatic, yet they laid the quiet groundwork upon which the Legion's greater assaults would unfold. Once the shape of the battlefield revealed itself, heavier forces would follow with sudden speed, bringing fast armor, close air support, and columns of mechanized infantry into the conflict. The transition from silent observation to decisive engagement could arrive with startling swiftness, as the Legion pushed forward from multiple directions at once. To those caught within this web of maneuver, it often felt as though the battlefield itself had begun to close around them. Deception played an important role during these operations, and Alpha Legion commanders frequently used feints and ambushes to test the strength of a defense or draw attention away from a vulnerable position. As their opponents reacted, weaknesses slowly appeared, and the watching commanders measured each opening with careful patience. When the moment was right, reserves of shock troops, heavy armor, and artillery would descend upon the exposed point, striking with overwhelming force that could shatter a defense in moments. To sustain this style of warfare, the Legion created many specialized formations, some carrying unusual equipment and rare forms of war gear whose origins were not widely known. These units were designed for very particular purposes, and their presence often remained hidden until the exact moment their abilities were required on the battlefield. Among the most unusual of these arrangements were the groups known as splinters, small subdivisions assigned to pursue a specific mission or strategic objective far from the main body of the Legion. A splinter might operate entirely alone, cut off from its allies and unconcerned with the survival of its own members if the greater task demanded sacrifice. In many campaigns, even allied forces fighting beside the Legion never realized that such a group existed, while elsewhere the rest of the Legion's own warriors remained unaware that a splinter moved quietly through the same war. After the heresy, the guiding idea attributed to Alpharius continued to shape the Legion's methods, encouraging them to strike an enemy in many different ways at the same moment. Among the most experienced warriors of the Legion were those who mastered the arts of infiltration and careful planning, figures sometimes described as thoughtsmiths whose minds worked patiently through layers of strategy. These chosen agents served the leaders of their warbands with quiet precision, weaving confusion around their targets until doubt and suspicion spread through an enemy force. In such circumstances, the battlefield rarely revealed itself as a simple clash of armies. Instead, the enemy often found themselves surrounded by uncertainty, unsure of which threats were real and which were carefully arranged distractions. When the final trap closed, it did so within an atmosphere already thick with mistrust and hesitation. The Legion's actions varied widely depending on the size of an operation and the character of the war zone in which it unfolded. Deception and hidden intent became the guiding habits of their campaigns, shaping decisions that ranged from direct military maneuver to subtler forms of interference. Warriors might approach from unexpected directions, dig tunnels beneath strong defenses, or stage diversions that drew attention away from a concealed strike. Elsewhere, their efforts moved beyond the immediate battlefield, reaching into the fragile systems that sustained an army or an entire world. Supply depots filled with ammunition, food, or fuel might vanish in sudden acts of sabotage, while transport routes quietly collapsed under unseen disruption. In darker moments, the Legion even tampered with the natural balance of a world, provoking atmospheric shifts or disturbances within the planet itself. The web of influence could extend further still, touching the loyalties of soldiers and officials through bribery or quiet persuasion. Imperial officers might be imitated by infiltrators, while propaganda spread among civilian populations, stirred unrest and encouraged rebellion. Heretical cults received aid. Enemy troops were persuaded to change allegiance, and distant corsairs, alien forces, or other traitor legions sometimes became temporary allies within a wider scheme. Through careful coordination of these many strands, the Legion constructed strategies that often appeared confusing or even incomprehensible to those who faced them. In truth, the design was deliberate, relying on methods that ignored the conventional boundaries of warfare. By treating open combat as only one piece within a larger design, the Alpha Legion could achieve its goals with smaller and more mobile forces than most commanders would ever dare to commit. Long ago, there existed a great chainsword that had once been carried only for ceremony, its oversized frame more a symbol of authority than a weapon meant for war. That changed after the Daemon Prince Garual of the Nine Sundered Souls was bound within its roaring mechanism, and from that moment the blade became something far more terrible. Those few with the strength of will to master the many hungry minds whispering inside it can cause the saw-toothed edge to shimmer and divide, until several blades seem to gnaw through the air at once with an immortal hunger. At the wielder's command, these phantom edges pass through the world like mist, yet when flesh draws near, they become keen and biting, eager to tear. Another relic takes the form of ancient Corvus Alpha pattern power armor, known quietly among its bearers as the Drakescale plate. It was forged long ago by a tech savant of the Dark Mechanicum who worked strange craft into the metal, setting living titanium scales taken from the mica skydrake across its plates. The armor's pauldrons, vambraces, and greaves carry the beast's natural resistance to flame, and when torrents of fire surge from a flamestorm cannon, the inferno spills across the armor's surface and falls away harmlessly, as water might slide down smooth pillars of black obsidian. Another weapon used is the Hydra's teeth, a strange type of bolt ammunition. Their casings must always be kept slick with blood-mixed oil. If not, they can detonate too early and kill the one carrying them. Many believe these rounds have a kind of awareness, similar to daemon weapons, as if dark sorcery has given each shell a hunger for destruction. When fired, they do not travel in a straight line. Instead, they seem to hunt through smoke and shadow for hidden targets. When they strike, they explode in a burst of burning gas that scorches the eyes and lungs, turning exposed flesh into blackened sludge. Another device, known as the Hydra's Whale, is outwardly a complex tool meant to disrupt communication, though the touch of the ruinous powers has twisted it into something far more insidious. When it is unleashed, a directed surge of viral scrap code seeps into Vox networks and communication arrays, spreading through them like a sickness until every signal collapses into confusion. Command structures falter, plans dissolve into chaos, and the enemy is left grasping blindly at fragments of broken orders. The device cannot be used endlessly, however, and after each burst, its charge must be restored through quiet ritual offerings made to darker forces. Among the relics carried by the Legion, there is also the icon of insurrection, a standard crowned by the 8-pointed Star of Chaos that serves as far more than a simple banner. Enchanted through long years by Alpha Legion demagogues and metamentalists, it acts as a magnet for the turbulent energies of chaos, quietly pushing thoughts of rebellion into every mind that gazes upon it. When it rises above a restless crowd, those simmering thoughts begin to grow and spread until discontented voices become violent conspirators and idle heretics turn into furious mobs determined to burn the domains of humanity to ash. There is a cloak known as the Mind Veil that shimmers softly with illusion whenever it is worn. It was stitched from the interlocking teeth of the chameleonic Hydra Sharks that once swam the waters of Dostoy Prime, and powerful chaos spells of confusion and displacement linger within every thread. Those who travel beside its bearer are surrounded by pale mirages that move exactly as they do, incorporeal reflections drifting just beside the real forms. With a quiet chant spoken in the dark tongue, the wearer may exchange places with one of these doppelgangers in an instant, leaving enemies staring at empty air while the true warrior appears elsewhere, close enough that the moment of death follows quickly after the moment of bewilderment. Another blade is spoken of in hushed voices as the Shade Blade, a weapon whose origins are rumored to lie far beyond the knowledge of the Imperium. Hidden inside its hilt is a fragment of unfamiliar cloaking technology, and when darkness gathers or light grows faint, the wielder fades until he is scarcely more than a shifting shadow. And finally, there is the bolt gun called Viper's Bite, an ornate weapon whose muzzle curves into the shape of a serpent's head, while its magazine seems never to run dry. When it fires, the sound is little more than a dry hiss drifting through the air, though the quiet moment is often followed by distant screams. Each bolt leaves the barrel wrapped in a thin glow of acrid green flame, and that burning energy clings to the projectile with such virulence that it can eat its way through even the ancient warplate worn by veterans clad in Terminator armor. Among the many secrets kept by the Alpha Legion, even the true shape of their fleet remains difficult to confirm with certainty, because it was customary for the Legion to alter the identifying marks of their vessels after an operation, and at times the same name would quietly pass from one warship to another without warning. When the Legion finally joined the Great Crusade, as the last of the Legiones Astartes to do so, its fleet was formed largely from newly forged battleships, and many believed that it quickly grew to become one of the largest fleets maintained by any legion during that long campaign among the stars. At the heart of this force sailed the massive Gloriana-class battleship known as Alpha, which served as the personal flagship of Alpharius during both the Great Crusade and the years of the Horus Heresy. During the fierce and confusing fighting within the Aloxus Nebula, The Alpha suffered severe damage while simultaneously battling the flagship of the 6th Legion, the Horus Heresy, and a Ramillies-class starfort belonging to the 1st Legion known as the Chimera. Its sister vessel, the Gloriana-class battleship Beta, also stood close to the center of the Legion's command, at times serving as the primary flagship of Alpharius or Omegon, and it once traveled with an Imperial expedition to attend a meeting with the mysterious Cabal. When that meeting ended, the Beta turned its weapons upon the Imperial forces that had escorted it, supported in that sudden betrayal by the Alpha itself, and in later years the ship was again seen under Omegon's command as he felt the death of his twin Alpharius during the Battle of Pluto while standing aboard that vessel. Other ships bore names that returned again and again through the Legion's hidden records, and among them was the battleship Delta, a name carried by several Alpha Legion warships, though one vessel bearing it was remembered as the largest. During the pursuit of the elusive 6th Legion fleet, it was placed at the vanguard of the Alpha Legion's warships, and in the shifting passages of safe space within the Alaxis Nebula, it emerged face to face with the Space Wolves battleship Ragnarok. The captain of that vessel, the Wolf Lord Gunnar Gunhild, chose to sacrifice both his life and his ship to buy time for his legion to escape. And while the Delta poured heavy fire into the Ragnarok, the dying vessel answered with unorthodox tactics. Its final torpedoes forced the Delta to halt before the burning battleship rammed forward, and the sheer mass of the crippled Ragnarok drove the Alpha Legion ship deep into the corrosive clouds of the nebula, where both enormous vessels were ultimately consumed. Among the capital ships of the Legion were vessels such as the Gamma Lycurgus and the Zeta Telios, while the Dominus-class battleship Gamma Mu formed part of the heavy core of the Legion's line ships. During the same brutal struggle within the Alaxis Nebula, the Gamma Mu was destroyed beneath the concentrated fire of the Space Wolves battleship Ragnarok, and elsewhere the battle barge Omegon was observed supporting Armilis Dynat during the harrowing of Callista Mundi. In the void above Istvan V, during the terrible drop site massacre, the cruiser Theta fought among the many warships gathered there before being destroyed by the Iron Hand strike cruiser Veritas Verum. The fleet also contained the Basilius-class battle barge Sigma Pythonus, which led the Alpha Legion ships that struck Baramar V during the first battle of that world in the opening days of the Horus Heresy. Far later in history, another warship tied to the Legion's legacy appeared, the Despoiler-class battleship Anarchy's Heart, personal vessel of the Chaos Lord Arcos the Faithless, and the renegade warband known as the Faithless. For many centuries, Arcos used this battleship to launch raids from the Eye of Terror, until the long and infamous siege of Vrax drew toward its end, and the ship was destroyed by the Angels of Absolution battle barge Liberatory Delictum, together with the strike cruiser Repentant. Other vessels moved quietly through the wider conflict, including the heavy assault cruiser Anax Ro, which fought during the First Battle of Baramare, and a number of strike cruisers whose names surfaced in scattered accounts. Ships such as Lambda or Zeta formed part of that dispersed force, while the strike cruiser Occam's Razor once traveled with the small fleet of Dynat Mal, surviving for a time within the distant regions of the Orpheus sector before it was reportedly destroyed by the Necrons of the Maynarch dynasty. leaving its broken hull abandoned in a valley of bones upon the jungle world of Apollyon. Some cruisers operated far from the main fleets, completely alone. One of them was the strike cruiser Theta Malquiant, which traveled in isolation during the early years of the Horus Heresy. It was a sister ship to the Zeta Morgeld and was deliberately sacrificed so that an Alpha Legion cell led by Alpharius could infiltrate the Iron Hands aboard the Sisypheum. The Zeta Morgeld also hunted alone during the war. It was supposed to meet Alpharius, but instead encountered the Iron Hands ship Sisypheum and was defeated. The victors stripped the vessel of valuable parts, crew, and ammunition, then set it on a course into a nearby star. However, in an unexpected twist, the ship was later used to save the Sisypheum from another attacking Alpha Legion vessel, the Theta Malquiant. Smaller ships also played their part in the Legion's hidden wars. One such vessel was the escort Iota Malephilos, which had been deployed among many undermanned escorts meant to shield the Legion's capital ships during the ferocious fighting in the Alexis Nebula. During that struggle, a squad led by Bjorn the Fell-Handed succeeded in capturing the ship, slaying its captain and turning its guns against the Alpha Legion fleet, after which the vessel was integrated into the Space Wolves Legion fleet. In the chaos that followed, the frigate Kata Rho was destroyed by weapons fire from the captured escort after it had fallen into Space Wolves' hands during the same bitter battle among the clouds of the nebula. When observers attempted to describe the inner workings of the Alpha Legion, their accounts often drifted into contradiction, as though the Legion itself resisted being understood. Some reports spoke of a rigid hierarchy wrapped in deep secrecy, while others described a structure that appeared strangely open, where voices could challenge one another regardless of rank. Yet even among these conflicting impressions, certain patterns appeared again and again, especially in the way the warriors of the 20th Legion trained and fought. From their earliest hours as aspirants, those destined to become Alpha Legionaries did not learn the art of war as solitary fighters. They trained together as units whose fate depended upon shared success, and every exercise placed them in situations where cooperation was the only path to survival. These trials were said to be as deadly as those faced by any of the Legiones Astartes, yet intelligence and coordination were as necessary as courage, for no single aspirant could overcome the ordeal alone. Such discipline allowed the Legion to employ tactics that shifted and adapted with remarkable speed. The teachings of Alpharius demanded unity of action above all else, and this unity allowed formations to move with a fluid precision that observers struggled to follow. When these warriors fought in open battle, their coordination made them seem less like separate soldiers and more like a single living force, vast and deliberate, striking through many limbs, yet guided by one cold intention. Another trait consistently recorded was the Legion's mastery of infiltration, sabotage, espionage, and assassination. Before a battle was ever joined, the Alpha Legion often sought to weaken its enemy from within, removing leaders, fracturing alliances, and creating confusion that left opposing forces vulnerable. Prolonged attrition or static defense held little appeal for them, and they avoided such engagements whenever possible unless circumstances forced their hand. Despite this preference for subtlety, their their abilities in open warfare were widely acknowledged. Even commanders such as the War Master Horus and Sanguinius were known to have remarked upon the effectiveness of Alpha Legion maneuvers during battle. Their experience with covert warfare translated easily into feints, ambushes, and deceptive movements, allowing them to reshape the battlefield while their opponents struggled to grasp the pattern forming around them. Whether the Legion ever fully followed the organizational framework set down in the Principia Bellicosa remained uncertain. Although their structure outwardly resembled that of other Space Marine legions, their command arrangements were markedly more fluid. A legionary's role could shift as needed, responding to tactical demands that were perhaps understood only by those directing the wider strategy. Companies, battalions, and chapters existed, yet these divisions were frequently renamed or reorganized. Terms such as harrows, cohorts, hosts, and instruments appeared in different accounts, their meanings sometimes shifting even during a single campaign. Units were reassigned, their heraldry altered, their numbering replaced, and sometimes entire formations vanished from an order of battle only to reappear later in an altered form. This deliberate instability made the Legion almost impossible to track. Friend and foe alike struggled to determine its strength, intentions, or position, as records seemed to contradict one another. Some observers even suggested that this shifting nature extended to the identities of the legionaries themselves. Reports describe the warriors of the Alpha Legion in conflicting ways. Some sources speak of a strange physical uniformity among them, while others insist that they came from many different genetic origins. There were even accounts describing pale gray flesh lacking natural pigment, their skin marked with serpentine electues that shimmered faintly under the light. Whether these appearances were natural or the result of surgical alteration, psychological conditioning, or more obscure technologies remains unknown. It is equally unclear how willingly such transformations were accepted by the legionaries themselves, or whether they fully understood what had been done to them. On a strategic level, the Alpha Legion ensured that it possessed a wide variety of military capabilities. Their forces could conduct armored assaults, precise drop strikes, sustained artillery support, or close-quarter battles fought within the confined environments known as Zone Mortalis. Maintaining this flexibility required a constant flow of equipment and materials. Forge worlds such as Lucius Ingalidion and Phaeton were known to supply the Legion with vast quantities of war material, and some of these arrangements were reportedly negotiated directly by the War Master Horus. Yet even these official agreements could not fully explain the variety of rare and specialized equipment later recovered from Alpha Legion battlefields. One striking example involved a distinctive variant of the Mark VI Corvus pattern power armor. Evidence suggests that the Alpha Legion possessed this armor well before it was widely issued to other legions, including during the Drop Site Massacre and the First Battle of Paramar. Later examination revealed that the armor, often called Corvus Alpha, differed from standard designs and may have been developed from incomplete prototypes obtained by covert means. Such findings led some analysts to conclude that the Legion had quietly established hidden manufactories and supply caches long before the Horus Heresy erupted. These facilities were believed to exist both within Imperial territory and beyond it, concealed in locations that have never been fully uncovered. Another innovation encountered during the drop site massacre was the use of Bane Strike bolter rounds. These unusual munitions appear to have been designed specifically to penetrate the ceramite armor worn by Space Marines. Though powerful, the rounds placed great strain on the weapons that fired them and reduced effective range. Their impact during the betrayal at Istvan V was nevertheless devastating, though fortunately for the Loyalists, their production was difficult. Supplies remained limited, and only the Alpha Legion and the Sons of Horus were known to deploy them in large numbers during that brutal opening act of treachery. Estimating the Legion's true strength during the early days of the Horus Heresy has proven equally difficult. Contemporary records often place their numbers somewhere between 120,000 and 130,000 legionaries, a figure that would place them among the middle ranks of the Space Marine legions. Other analyses proposed a much smaller number, suggesting that the Legion might have fielded closer to 90,000 warriors, based on the largest concentration of Alpha Legion forces ever observed in a single theater of war. Yet later examination of scattered battle reports revealed something more curious, for while one group fought in a known region of space, another formation bearing the same heraldry was recorded operating far away at precisely the same time. If these reports were accurate, the Legion's strength may have reached as high as 180,000 legionaries, a number that would make it one of the largest of the Legiones Astartes. Such a possibility remained largely unrecognized by both sides of the coming civil war. In equipment and starfaring capability, the Alpha Legion was formidable. Observers frequently reported that its warriors possessed some of the most advanced war gear available to the Legiones Astartes. Maximus pattern armor in the heavy cataphracti and Tartaros suits of Terminator plate appeared frequently among them, alongside vehicles such as the Sicaron battle tank and weapons including plasma systems and conversion beam armaments. Their fleet was equally impressive in breadth, though its composition differed from that of many other legions. Rather than maintaining large numbers of massive capital ships or dedicated siege vessels, the Alpha Legion relied heavily upon swift cruisers and numerous escort craft whose speed and range allowed them to move unpredictably across vast distances. Rumors also circulated that some of these ships incorporated captured alien technology. Certain witnesses claimed that Xenos vessels had even been integrated directly into the Legion's fleets, though proof of such claims remained elusive. Considering the Legion's habit of operating far beyond Imperial borders and maintaining hidden bases, such suspicions were difficult to confirm or deny. During the years of the Horus Heresy itself, the Alpha Legion displayed a strange resilience. While other legions suffered devastating losses that permanently reduced their strength, the 20th seemed capable of replenishing its ranks with unsettling speed. Observers began to compare it to the Hydra of myth, a creature whose severed heads only multiplied when struck. Among the Legion's more specialized formations was a unit known as the Efrit Stealth Squad. This formation operated during the later stages of the Great Crusade and throughout the early years of the Horus Heresy, carrying out missions that required exceptional stealth and precision. Many historians believe that the Alpha Legion pioneered the use of Legion Seeker squads, a concept later adopted by other legions as the Crusade expanded. Yet the Alpha Legion refined this idea further. From these origins emerged elite operatives known as headhunters, sometimes also called Efrit, depending on the source describing them. Their task was to slip behind enemy lines and inflict sudden, decisive damage by eliminating key leaders and critical assets. These small teams were composed of some of the Legion's most adaptable infiltrators. They operated under the direct authority of senior commanders and carried specialized equipment designed for their purpose, including rare ammunition capable of penetrating the armor of even the Legiones Astartes. Another formidable formation was known as the Lernian Terminator Squad, a name drawn from ancient Terran myth. These warriors served as the Legion's most accomplished shock assault troops and were typically equipped with cataphracti pattern Terminator armor richly adorned with elaborate decoration. Armed with weapons such as Volkite chargers and advanced heavy armaments, they specialized in rapid assaults against the most dangerous enemy formations. Some battle recordings describe them deploying through teleportation strikes, supported by compact conversion beam weapons and protective phase field devices. When the Lernaean entered a battlefield, their purpose was clear. They targeted the strongest opposing forces and destroyed them with overwhelming brutality, seeking not only to remove a threat, but also to break the morale of any survivors who witnessed their attack. Beyond these elite units, the Alpha Legion became famous for its mastery of disguise and infiltration. Legion agents were capable of blending seamlessly into the ranks of those they observed, copying speech patterns, behavior, and even posture with remarkable precision. This skill sometimes required extreme measures. During the drop site massacre on Istvan V, Alpha Legion operatives made use of the bodies of fallen Raven Guard warriors. Apothecaries carefully removed the faces of the dead and surgically grafted them onto infiltrators, reshaping bone and muscle so that the disguise would withstand close scrutiny. To strengthen the illusion further, the infiltrator consumed the flesh of the fallen Astartes. Through the function of the Omophagea organ, the legionary absorbed fragments of the victim's memories, allowing him to mimic the thoughts and experiences of the warrior whose identity he had assumed. Even psychic examination could be thwarted, as the Legion's librarians altered the infiltrator's mind to erase traces of his original identity. Though the Council of Nicaea had forbidden such practices, the Alpha Legion continued to employ them in secret, ensuring that their agents could walk unnoticed among their enemies. An infiltrator assigned to such a mission rarely knew how many others had been sent to the same target. There might be only one operative among the enemy ranks, or there could be dozens scattered across the formation, each unaware of the others. The uncertainty mattered little, because every Alpha Legion agent was trained to survive alone until the moment came to act. These operatives understood that discovery meant death, Yet they accepted this fate without hesitation if the mission demanded it. Remaining unnoticed required constant vigilance, and the infiltrator learned to observe the smallest details of those around him. Through surgical alteration and the genetic knowledge gained from the Amophagia organ, even the shape of an infiltrator's voice could be changed. Such care was necessary because the heightened hearing of a space marine could detect even the slightest irregularity in speech or tone. Living among those they imitated, the agents slowly absorbed the rhythms of daily life. Small gestures, familiar expressions, and routine habits were carefully copied until the disguise became almost natural. Yet the process was never perfect, and each passing day required renewed attention to maintain the illusion. Within the culture of the Alpha Legion, these infiltrators did not expect recognition. Their actions were not meant to bring personal glory, and they returned quietly to anonymity once their task had been fulfilled. Satisfaction came only from knowing that their work had served the designs of their Primarchs. The Legion also demonstrated an unusual ability to move unnoticed among civilian populations. With the correct clothing and carefully applied psychic influence, their warriors could pass through crowded settlements without drawing attention. Records hint at additional formations within the Legion whose exact purpose remains obscure. Names such as Ratoshen, Shayatan, Guarin, and Echidna appear in scattered sources, though their roles have never been clearly established. Another term that appears occasionally is Gristhor, which may have referred to the Legion's librarians or perhaps to a broader intelligence network connected to them. Although Alpharius outwardly accepted the ruling of the Council of Nicaea and disbanded the Librarius, this stance did not survive the turmoil of the heresy. Beyond its Astartes warriors, the Alpha Legion also relied heavily upon human and augmented human operatives. Many Space Marine legions employed mortal forces during the Great Crusade, but the 20th Legion cultivated these agents with unusual intensity. Among them were individuals known in some records as the Sparatoi, a name possibly derived from an ancient Terran phrase meaning the sown men. These operatives infiltrated human societies long before the arrival of the Legion's armies, quietly preparing the ground for the conflict to come. Working alone or within hidden cells, they spread rumors and disinformation, encouraged rebellion, and manipulated local factions to weaken established authority. Many had little knowledge of one another and sometimes did not even know who truly commanded them. Their loyalty was maintained through strict conditioning and often reinforced with surgical modification, cybernetic enhancement, or chemical alteration. When the moment arrived for the Alpha Legion to strike openly, these networks unleashed waves of sabotage and destruction that further destabilized the enemy. Evidence suggests that such networks extended deep into the Imperium itself before the Horus Heresy erupted, hidden within military units, administrative bodies, and civilian institutions. These agents waited patiently until the Great War revealed their presence. The Legion recruited new operatives in nearly every campaign zone it entered. Many came from Imperial military formations, though the Alpha Legion was known to approach almost anyone whose skills might prove useful. Once recruited, these individuals often remained in their original positions while secretly serving the Legion's interests. Should one of these operatives be threatened with exposure, Alpha Legionaries were willing to go to extreme lengths to protect the asset, even silencing other Imperial personnel if necessary. Most of these agents bore a small tattoo shaped like a Hydra, echoing the symbol of the Legion they served. The command structure guiding these efforts remained difficult to define, though each deployment acknowledged a formal chain of authority. That chain shifted depending upon circumstance and expertise. Specialists held unquestioned authority within their fields. A siege master or vigilator might command obedience even from officers of higher rank whenever their particular knowledge was required. At the same time, every unit was expected to function as an independent cell capable of acting without direct oversight. Initiative was encouraged, and warriors were trusted to pursue their objectives according to their own judgment while still serving the wider strategy. Because of this approach, the Alpha Legion demonstrated remarkable responsiveness during battle. Their forces adapted quickly to changing conditions, often coordinating their actions with a precision that rivaled any other legion. Their commanders rarely sought glory through heroic duels or dramatic displays of leadership. Instead, they often watched the unfolding battle quietly, studying the patterns of movement and destruction before intervening at precisely the moment when their presence would cause the greatest disruption. Titles and ranks within the Legion reflected this flexible approach. Some designations resembled those used by other legions, such as the Sons of Horus or the Blood Angels, though it remains uncertain whether this similarity reflected genuine adoption or deliberate imitation. Among the most distinctive titles was that of the Harrow Master, known in some accounts by the term Jaryuk. This individual served as the supreme commander of Alpha Legion forces within a particular war zone. The Harrow Master's role demanded constant awareness of the shifting battlefield. By studying the smallest developments within a campaign, the Harrow Master directed the Legion's forces with remarkable speed, creating and discarding strategies as the situation evolved. Holding this title was regarded as a great honor within the Legion, and even those who mistrusted the Alpha Legion acknowledged the remarkable skill its Harrow Masters displayed in shaping the course of war. It is striking that the Harrow Masters were among the very few members of the Alpha Legion whose names appeared openly in surviving records. Even then, uncertainty surrounds these identities, for it remains unclear whether the names truly belonged to specific individuals. Some observers have suggested that a single warrior might have used several different identities over time, while others have proposed that multiple commanders may have shared the same name as a form of deliberate deception. In a legion where disguise, misdirection, and secrecy were woven deeply into its traditions, the truth behind those recorded names may never be known with certainty. After the Horus Heresy, the internal structure of the Alpha Legion became even more difficult to discern than before. On rare occasions, Imperial forces succeeded in assassinating individuals believed to be senior commanders within the Legion, Yet their deaths produced little visible change in the behavior of its forces. The Legion's emblem offers some insight into this resilience. The Hydra, a creature of myth whose many heads could continue fighting even after one was severed, mirrors the Alpha Legion's manner of command and its tendency to launch numerous coordinated actions at once. The twin Primarchs Alpharius and Omegon were known to value careful planning and cooperation between different elements of their forces. They favored strategies that offered several possible outcomes, ensuring that if one approach failed, another would already be unfolding elsewhere. These principles remain deeply embedded in the Legion's culture, and the warbands that emerged after the heresy continued to employ them. Their operations became increasingly scattered and secretive, yet the underlying methods remained recognizable. Before attacking an Imperial target, the Legion typically prepared the ground through extensive covert work. Agents spread corruption and gathered intelligence, while hidden supporters weakened resistance within the enemy's society. When the attack finally came, it rarely struck from a single direction. Multiple operations unfolded together, each designed to reinforce the others and deepen the confusion of those attempting to defend themselves. Chaos cults played an important role in these campaigns. Cultists carried out acts of sabotage, spread propaganda, and stirred unrest among the population, drawing attention away from the Legion's own movements while undermining local stability. The Alpha Legion also proved willing to cooperate with other enemies of the Imperium. Alliances were sometimes formed with fellow traitor legions, and on certain occasions even with alien forces such as the Drukhari. On distant worlds far from the Eye of Terror, the Legion relied less upon demonic allies, since such beings could not remain stable in the material universe for extended periods. Instead, they focused on securing the loyalty of local cults, whose belief and devotion could be harnessed when the moment for open conflict finally arrived. And so the tale of the Alpha Legion settles not into clarity, but into deeper shadow. From the sealed gene laboratories of the Emperor to the hidden trials of the Proto-Legion era, from the first guarded strain of the 20th gene seed to the whispered signs of unidentified warriors moving beneath false colors, their history begins not with triumph in the light, but with silence. Even before they bore the Hydra openly, they were already a thing divided from ordinary record, shaped apart, tested apart, and perhaps intended for purposes never spoken beyond the highest circles of imperial power. In those earliest years, they were less a legion than a question left unanswered, small in number, elusive in station, and absent from the great boasts of the early crusade. They moved instead through fragments of testimony and scattered archives. Precise strikes, quiet abductions, assassinations without attribution, orders none dared challenge. What later generations would call the Ghost Legion seemed to haunt the edges of imperial expansion long before the Alpha Legion ever fully stepped into public view. When at last they emerged, they did not abandon that nature. They refined it. Under Alpharius and Omegon, whether seen as one well or two, the Legion became the living expression of secrecy given martial form, unity without transparency. discipline without trust, coordination so absolute that the individual seemed to dissolve into the whole. Even their name carried contradiction. Alpha as beginning, Alpha as primacy, Alpha as the last revealed, and yet perhaps the first intended for some hidden design. The Hydra was no mere badge upon armor. It was a confession of method. One head concealed another. One blow masked the true strike. One identity became many, and many spoke with a single voice. By deception, infiltration, sabotage, and orchestrated terror, the Legion made war not only upon bodies and fortresses, but upon certainty itself. Their enemies were weakened long before the first open assault. Their allies were never fully at ease beside them. Even their brothers among the Primarchs saw in them something cold and difficult to measure. And perhaps that is why their fall can never be called simple. When they turned toward Horus, they did not do so in the manner of open traitors drunk on hatred or vengeance. They chose through prophecy, through manipulation, through a belief that loyalty to the Emperor might demand a path that outwardly resembled betrayal. Whether they were deceived by the Cabal, whether they deceived themselves, or whether they still pursued some fractured vision of service through damnation, the result was the same. The Legion entered the heresy as it had entered history, concealed behind motives no witness could fully trust. Throughout the war, they remained what they had always been, a weapon that operated best when unseen, a blade guided through confusion, a hand already inside the walls before the alarm was raised. At Istvan, in Kondax, in the Alexis Nebula, at Pluto, and across the countless hidden wars of sabotage and infiltration, they proved again that the most dangerous enemy is not the one who declares himself, but the one already standing where he should not be. Even the death of Alpharius did not end them. A Hydra does not perish cleanly. It recedes, divides, and returns under another face. So the Alpha Legion passed beyond the heresy much as it had passed through the Great Crusade, not broken into simple ruin, but scattered into ambiguity. Warbands vanished into the dark between worlds. Cults rose and fell in their wake. Inquisitors hunted them. High Lords declared them destroyed, and still they endured, not because they were strongest in the straightforward sense, but because they had long ago ceased to rely on any single center, any single truth, any single death. That is the lasting unease they leave behind. Other legions may be remembered for honor, for rage, for sacrifice, for corruption laid bare. The Alpha Legion endures as uncertainty itself, a hidden archive, a false name spoken with conviction, a loyal cry uttered by traitor lips, a beginning that may never have ended. And in that silence, beneath the coiling sign of the Hydra, one question remains where no final answer can reach it. Were they ever truly lost, or have they only continued the mission for which they were first made in secret, as they always have, unseen?